Well, hello. What is up, everybody? Darren Graham here with my first live stream here on the Voice of College Football. No, you're not seeing it wrong. Mark is just fine. Everything's good. The Big Ten live show is back, however. Things are more than just okay. Things are more than just fine. Things are great. And the Big Ten Live is back. In case you guys have followed me before on my other channel, Darren Talks Ball, you kind of know how this goes. And if you're new to this, let me explain. We're going to go over some of the biggest games from the previous week. We're going to go over, I got to take a look at my notes here. Illinois versus Penn State, which was a crazy one. Crazy week in the Big Ten altogether, by the way. Nebraska struggles for like 3.5 quarters against Purdue. USC needs a comeback to beat Wisconsin, outscoring them something like 28-0 in the second half. Minnesota, Michigan comes down to a call that maybe shouldn't have been called towards the end there. And then, of course, we've got some other great games to cover. We're gonna go over the Illinois Penn State game in depth. We're gonna go over Ohio State, Michigan State in depth, and I'm going to explain to you guys why even I, as a Michigan fan, think Ohio State is just flatly the best team in this conference. And I think anyone with two eyeballs and a brain can see that right now, to be frank and honest with you. We're going to go over also Minnesota versus Michigan because I had to cram it in there as a Michigan fan. And that was also a very intriguing game. So don't come after me in the comments. It was a great game to go over. Then we're also going to preview this upcoming weekend's set of games. We got Iowa at Ohio State, which could have been an intriguing matchup, but I honestly don't know if it's all that intriguing. Iowa with some issues heading into this game, and honestly, Ohio State looks like they're firing on all cylinders. As I mentioned before, they are the best team in this conference right now. I got to hand it to them. And then we're also going to preview Michigan. Yes, we're going to talk about Michigan twice in this live stream. So bear with me here if you're an Ohio State fan or whatever. But no matter what team you're a fan of, give this video a like, help get it up into the algorithm and all that good stuff. And go over and subscribe to the Big Ten channel, which is now fully up and running. I myself am uploading videos over there. We also have JR from the Ohio State channel occasionally doing live streams. I think, if I remember right, Saturdays, Sundays, and Tuesdays or something like that. So 3 times a week, you get a live stream with JR of Big Ten Huddle, which is a great channel you should check out as well. And then you get me, you get Darren Graham, whether you love me or hate me. This is what you get. This is what you get right here. And then you get me of Darren Talks Ball fame. Kind of. I don't know. But you can go check out that channel as well. And just to get started, what's up, Jackson Johnson? What's up, everybody? If you have questions in the chat, we can also go over those as well. Of course, I'm going to try really hard to not get too distracted by the Lions Monday Night Football game because I am, not going to lie, kind of an idiot and don't schedule things. TJ asked me the other day, he was like, so when do you want to do the show? Like, what night of the week sounds good to you? And I was like, I really want to do it early in the week so we can get clips, so we can get these previews out early to give you guys the most amount of time to watch all the content that gets cut up from these and everything through the week. And I was like, let's do it on Monday night. There's nothing else going on Monday night, right? Monday Night Football. Completely forgot about Monday Night Football, and my Lions are playing. Of course, I live in Michigan fan, and a Lions fan as well. And if you guys want, I can do little updates here and there of how that game is going as well. What's up? I see Jackson Johnson is already in the chat. And of course, you guys, excuse me, bear with me here while I figure this stuff out. Don't forget, of course, to like, share, and subscribe. This has been a dream, by the way. I wanted to open up this stream before we really get into the games. We wanted to go over and all that stuff on this live stream. Really wanted to give a thank you to Mark Rogers for allowing me to do this. This is honestly kind of a dream come true. I started my channel a little bit over a year ago thinking I'd be lucky to get 100 subscribers, and here we all are now. This is a great opportunity. Wanted to give a shout out to TJ over at the Michigan channel and Ferris Khan as well. Ferris was kind of the guy that gave TJ the heads up on getting me on over at the Michigan channel, and now we're over here at the main channel. Started from the bottom, and now we're here. Now let's just get into it. Why don't we? Let's get into Illinois versus Penn State. Relatively a rock fight of a game. We'll go over the quarterback stats briefly here, but I really want to talk running the ball in defense, which is what we saw in spades in this game. Altmaier, of course, goes 16 of 25 for 185 yards, a 7.4 yards per attempt average, which is below his usual playing level, I assume, but still not terrible either. Of course, he had one touchdown and an interception, and a painful interception for Illinois fans at that. 64% completion percentage in this game and a 37.1 ESPN QBR. And then Aller went for 15 for 21, 135 yards, a 6.4 average, no touchdowns, no interceptions, a 71% completion percentage, and an 80.4 ESPN QBR himself. Aller really did all the more what little bit he really had to do in this game with his arm to get Penn State the victory, because this was really a rushing battle, and this is really where I think Penn State won this game. Caden Fagan, we talked about him in my preview and prediction video, by the way, over on my channel on Darren Talks Ball. We do preview and prediction videos of all the big teams each and every week, all the big games at least. We talked about Caden Fagan and this Illinois rushing attack, and it kind of let you down if you were an Illinois game in this one, I have to be honest. 13 carries, just 13 carries in this one. I don't know if he was banged up at one point or another. I didn't get to watch the full game. I was watching it in bits and pieces over here as I was up north in Michigan. In Michigan, we say up north, by the way. I should say that clarifies. We probably have people watching from all over the country here. By the way, like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. I was up north for my niece's birthday over the weekend, so I feel like I have a fair excuse for not watching as much college football as one would expect from a college football content creator. Ultimately, he ran for 4.9 yards per carry, but his long of the day was for 34 yards. So outside of that 34-yard carry that I believe came a little bit later in the game, Caden Fagan didn't really do much. The people that did do a lot in this game, though, were Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and they did not let that Penn State offense and that home crowd down at all. Allen went for 18 for 102 and a 5.7 yards per carry average. Singleton one-upped him in the yards per carry average, but fewer yards altogether. 16 of 94 for 5.9. I believe they each ran for a touchdown in this one. And Penn State, I just have to say this as a Michigan fan. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie, and I'm going to be upfront and honest with you guys as the host of the show. I hope you know that, and hope you can tell that already and going forward. I wish Michigan hired Andy Kotelnicki. I do. Seeing what Andy Kotelnicki was doing, especially later on this game. And by the way, that Penn State offensive line was just bruising. It was dominant. I think if you were to take a team photo of that offensive line, it would just look like a bunch of bulldozers lined up one by one. And by the way, Tyler Warren, take a bow, young man, just doing everything that needed to be done in this game to win this game. Combined, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton go for 34 carries for 196 yards, 5.76 yards per carry. And I know this was somewhat of a battle. Illinois kept it close. Illinois made some mistakes down in the red zone. Of course, they had that big fumble-rooski on, I think it was a 1st and goal. There was a bad snap that drove them back, and they didn't end up scoring that drive. They missed a field goal. They had a couple of missed field goals, and of course, the late interception. But it almost felt to me, and this is where I'll make another Michigan comparison. I apologize, I'm a Michigan guy, so I'm going to talk a bit about them here and there. It almost felt to me at certain points in that game, especially in the third quarter, later in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, that kind of boa constrictor, for lack of a better term. I don't actually really like Joel Klatt's analogies sometimes. I think they're super cheesy, but I end up using them because, hey, they're accurate. It just felt like eventually, with how well Penn State was running the football and what they were doing on both the offensive and defensive lines, because we're going to get into the defense for Penn State here in a minute as well, that the dam was going to break, because Penn State's both their offensive and defensive lines were playing extremely well. And we saw that later in the fourth quarter. And what Kotelnicki was doing with that offense, with both backs out there at the same time at times, with Drew Aller back there, with Tyler Warren lined up at the H-back, with bringing in the other quarterback, the backup. I'm blanking on names. I'm not familiar with the backup quarterback over there, but bringing him in and kind of wildcat looks and running the quarterback really, really diced up Illinois' defense later in that game. I mean, putting linebackers in conflict, getting linebackers out of gaps. Illinois towards the end of the game was also gassed defensively, because I didn't look up the stat here, but I'd be willing to bet that Penn State controlled the time of possession later in that game. And it was just down the line. It felt again like the dam was going to break and that boa constrictor was going to kind of just use two analogies in one there. That just like pimp my rided that analogy thing. But anyway, it just felt like it was going to end up in Penn State's favor. We talk all the time over on my channel, and you guys are going to get used to it over here as well. To win in the Big Ten, I don't care how many flashy 5-star wide receivers you have and how many higher upside guys you have and how well you recruit. At the end of the day, in the Big Ten, especially later in the fall, which we're now getting into October, we're getting these big games, we're getting weather games, we're getting rainy games and everything. Just had somebody comment, why aren't you on YouTube? We are on YouTube. We are on the main channel. Sorry, this knocked me off balance there for a second. David Reed. We are on YouTube. You can find us at the Voice of College Football. Anyway, later on in the fall, especially in the Big Ten, if you want to win Big Ten football, you got to be able to run the football. You got to stop the run. You got to convert on third downs. You got to play great defense. I saw all of that out of Penn State in this game. Now, they had their problems that this game was tied 7-7 at half. And I think anyone who previewed this game, I myself predicted it would kind of be a 14-3 score at the half. I did predict that Penn State would relatively kind of blow out Illinois, and hats off to Illinois in this one. They proved a lot to me that they are a really great team. So Penn State didn't absolutely dominate the game, but when you look at a lot of the stats, it's like they controlled the game is what they did. By the way, they held Pat Bryant, and to get into Penn State's defensive play here for a second, they held Pat Bryant, the really great Illinois wide receiver, to just 2 receptions for 33 yards. That defense, to get into Penn State's defense, is maybe, I don't know where they rank in SP Plus currently. It was like number 4, number 5 a week or two ago. They have what every great defense has, and that is quality players at every level of the defense. There's not a single level of that defense or part of that defense that you can go to and you can take advantage of and exploit. Durant, by the way, Zane Durant really stood out in this game with a sack and 2 TFLs. And overall, as a defense in this game, they had 7 sacks and 13 TFLs. Now, I know some of those TFLs don't technically count like classically, like they weren't all on Penn State. It was more on Illinois, especially with the fumble and things like that. But 7 sacks, 13 tackles for a loss. And of course, the dam finally broke when A.J. Harris had that late game interception. Penn State then went on an 8-play, 41-yard drive that ended in a touchdown. And that was all she wrote, because by then, I believe, if I remember right, they had a 21-7 point lead with only 1:55 left. And with all the more Altmaier was really able to do against that defense all game, that was all she wrote. Altmaier, I thought, played well at times in this game. Actually, he picked up some first downs with his legs. He was decisive. He is a very, of course, experienced quarterback at this point. Only 1 interception in this one, and that makes it only 1 interception for him so far this year. I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois is still a great team going down the line. They impressed me. That hostile environment in Happy Valley is one of the more difficult places to play in all the country, especially at night. And that's really what I got on Illinois versus Penn State. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. PSU Jim says need to fix the kicker situation. Penn State missed some field goals in that one as well, didn't they? Now that I think about it, we're going to getting some texts here. Apparently, we are on the wrong channel. We're on Mark Rogers' channel. Whoops. We're not on the Voice of College Football. We are on Mark Rogers' channel, his personal channel. So that's why we are not actually on YouTube, David Reed. I'm going to text TJ here real quick. Good practice. At least. This is my practice trial run. There we go. We still got a few people watching. We got 70 people watching live, even though we're on the wrong channel, technically. But who cares, right? We are talking ball, which is one of my favorite things to do. Like, share, and subscribe. Anyway, subscribe to Mark's channel. I just noticed in the screenshot, he's only got like 50. Subscribe to Mark's channel. I'm sure he would also appreciate that. Maybe. We're going to get into Michigan State versus Ohio State. Ohio State, of course, traveling to East Lansing and getting an easy dub in a minute here. But first, I was hoping to get more questions and comments in the comments. But if you guys don't have anything else, we'll just roll over to that. There we go. Still figuring out how to do the banners and stuff. That's a little audio cue for Chris. Shout outs to Chris, by the way, who cuts these. There we go. Another good clap right there. We just talked about what it takes to win in the Big Ten. We talked about third down conversions. We talked about running the football. We talked about playing great defense, especially this time of year. You get inclement weather, you get weather games, you get all kinds of things that can throw you off of your game. There wasn't really any inclement weather in East Lansing last Saturday. It wasn't really that cold. I live about 70 miles away, for instance. I know. There wasn't really anything outside of that other than maybe the intimidation of playing one of the best teams, if not the best team in the entire country, in the Ohio State Buckeyes. And still, Michigan State. First of all, to me, Michigan State really in this game looked like a team, and I've been saying this so far this season, that looks like they're a year or two away. That there's just, you'll see Aiden Childs make some very pretty throws. You'll see the tight end that they have that doesn't get talked about enough, by the way, Jack Velling, make some incredible catches. You'll see Lynch Adams break out some great runs. This team likes to run seemingly a lot of stretch plays and a lot of off-tackle plays, which I think is good for them to do because I don't think between the tackles is their game. Their offensive line is one of the things that I think they actually need to fix. You'll see them make great plays. You'll see them gain some yardage, and then you'll see them completely blunder it up. I'm a nerd. I play a lot of chess.com, and it's interesting. And on chess.com, you can go over kind of like your game score, game analysis after every game. It feels like if you were to do this for Michigan State, it would be great play, blunder. I'm going to break down the first 5 drives they had in this game, which took up the first half, by the way, just to give you guys an example. So OSU gets the ball first. They go down the field and score a field goal. Then Michigan State goes 7 plays for 55 yards, so that's really good. They get a 4th and 1 at the 20 and a QB sneak that was not executed very well, absolutely fails. The center and the quarterback were a little off on the timing of that. The center seemed to kind of dive first, and the quarterback kind of paused for a second, and it was bad. Then it goes to 10-0. OSU scores on their second drive. So now you're in a hole. Now you're down 10-0, and now maybe the pressure is mounting a little bit. They go 5 plays, 64 yards in just 5 plays on the SP Plus #1 defense, by the way. According to Bill Connolly's metrics, Ohio State came into this game as the SP Plus #1 rated defense. And Jack Velling fumbles just inside of the 10. So now you got a turnover and downs, and you got a straight-up turnover, and then 10-0. You get a touchdown off of a Will Howard interception. I believe that was a pick 6. If I remember right, and if I see it correctly here in my notes. So it's 10-7. Then OSU gets the ball back after the pick 6. They score, make it 17-7. And then MSU goes 9 plays for 59 yards. And now I'm thinking MSU can score here, make it 17-14, and we could have a game. I'm not saying that MSU would have won that game, but in an alternate universe somewhere, that first half ends with Ohio State up 20-17 or 20-14 or something like that. And you're thinking miracles can happen, right? MSU could potentially keep this close, and who knows? And Aiden Childs fumbles at the 16. So now you have turnover on downs, fumble, 3 out of your first 4 drives. And one of those drives technically is just an interception return. Then the teams exchange punts. MSU goes 3 plays for -2 yards on their last drive of the half. And then what do you know? The talent and the experience and just plainly the depth and breadth of this Ohio State team takes over, and Jeremiah Smith scores an incredible touchdown, makes it 24-7. MSU tried a shot play on that. They had one more possession. They tried a shot play, and then they just knelt down and kind of just gave up the first half. And against a team like Ohio State, against any Big Ten team, we just talked about Illinois and how I think they're still a pretty good team. They're a decent team in the Big Ten. You can't make mistakes like that against Illinois and their talent level, and Luke Altmaier and Pat Bryant and Caden Fagan and that good, decent to good offensive line that they have. They will make you pay. Ohio State will make you pay again and again and again. They can beat you even when you play your perfect game. They can beat you. So at halftime it's 24-7, and it ends up something like, I didn't even write the final score down because why does it matter? Ultimately, in that first half, MSU has the ball, by the way, in that first half for 27 plays. They get 180 yards in the first half, again, against the SP Plus #1 defense in the country, and they have just 7 points to show for it. By the way, on my channel, I mention often, and I think it's funny, I think this game is an example of it. We're all kind of obsessed with yards covering college football, but this just goes to show that in some games, in particular, yards are kind of an empty statistic, because if you just bundle up a bunch of yards between the 20s and you turn it over in the red zone, or you go fail a 4th and 1 in the red zone, like in this game, those yards don't count for anything. But again, it actually showed me, and especially talking about that first half, that Michigan State with Aiden Childs, by the way, they have Nick Marsh, who was an incredibly great first-year freshman wide receiver. By the way, he's like 3rd behind Jeremiah Smith and the guy from Alabama in reception yards for a freshman wide receiver this year. So, yeah, they can be a very good team in the next 2 or 3 years. They just got to fix the mistakes. You got to get over that mental hurdle that I think exists, especially when you play really big teams. That's all I really got on MSU versus Ohio State. Really great game for a while in the first half. I thought that was looking interesting. And I even texted a buddy of mine who is an MSU grad, and I said, "Hey, what's up here? We could have a game on our hands." And just when I said that, Aiden Childs fumbles. So now that I think about it, maybe it's my fault. Who knows? Probably not. Things don't really happen that way. Stephen Cherry says, "Go Buckeyes." It's my first time doing that, pulling up a comment. Sure. Yeah. Go Buckeyes. Yeah. Sure. Anyone who knows I'm a Michigan fan. And we're going to get into Minnesota, traveling to Ann Arbor and nearly upsetting the Michigan Wolverines here in just a second. If you guys want, ask some questions in the chat, send in those super chats, although I don't think we can do super chats if we're not live on a monetized channel. We are live on X, though, so if you're watching on X, really appreciate that as well. This is good practice for me. Not going to lie, taking over this channel. Good practice. We'll be live, by the way, on the Big Ten channel next week. So go subscribe to the Big Ten channel, Big Ten at the Voice of College Football. There was a little bit of a technical difficulty with that behind the scenes, but we got it all figured out now. So that should be figured out for next week. We got to get into this Minnesota-Michigan game. We got to get into that. If we don't get into that now, I'm not going to... We only have so much time, unfortunately. So much time to talk college football. I'm going to give you guys some stats here. And it's going to be kind of very frustrating and borderline heartbreaking for Michigan fans because, I mean, the game itself was that for Michigan fans, right? By the way, I don't think there's a 4-1 team out there where their fans can justifiably be as frustrated as what Michigan fans are right now. I put out a video on my channel about it earlier today. There's also a video on the Big Ten channel at the Voice of College Football discussing the quarterback situation at Michigan, so you can check those out. Again, subscribe over there and all that good stuff. But I'm going to give you guys some stats here. Michigan's first half defense gave up 136 yards, but 44 of which came on the Hail Mary right before half. On nine possessions, 136 yards. If you don't count the 44 on the Hail Mary shot, that's many fewer than that. They forced 2 first half turnovers. They had the Hill interception and the Zeke Berry fumble recovery, 1 TFL, the interception, 4 sacks in the first 3 quarters. That's all they had. Up 24-3, 4 minutes left in the third quarter. Alex Orji throws the interception. And now we have to talk about it more. I feel like we have to talk about the quarterback situation more. If you go back and watch that video I put out earlier today, I don't think this offense is fixed by just plugging in Davis Warren or playing a 2-quarterback system or this or that. I'm just going to leave it here. You can go watch that other video. This quarterback play isn't going to be great no matter who is playing quarterback for this team right now, because there are a load of problems on this offense outside of quarterback. But I digress. After that interception, Minnesota goes on a 14-play, 76-yard drive for a touchdown. And you're thinking 24-10, this is still okay. Then they go on a 3-play, so Michigan goes 3 and out, absolutely nothing on offense in the third quarter after the interception. Then Minnesota all they need after that is a 3-play, 17-yard drive for a touchdown after a 60-yard punt return. We all talk about Michigan's path to victory in any given game and how narrow it is. At least we do on my channel. We have in the past. You have to play, if you're a team like Michigan, you have to play almost flawless on special teams. You just do. That's just the path. Great defense, great special teams, and an offense just good enough. Think Iowa over the past few years. That's Michigan right now. That's just the reality of it. Again, I told you guys it was going to be upfront and honest. We don't hold hands and sing hallelujah, kumbaya here. We talk college football, which is a black and white, results-driven sport. So deal with it. Jared Goff, believe it or not, just broke a sack and got a completion. That was wild. That never happens. But I digress. 0-0 in the first quarter, by the way. They give up the punt return. 17-yard drive is all that Minnesota needs on 3 plays. 3 plays. And by the way, Minnesota in the first half, leading up to that interception, so a half and 3/4 of a quarter, their offense was getting less than 3 yards per play. After that, it was over 6 yards per play. And then Michigan goes 3 and out again, offense doing nothing. And Minnesota goes on a 14-play, 75-yard drive for a touchdown. So after the interception, before the interception, remember, Michigan had only given up 136 yards and 9 possessions. In those 3 possessions I just listed, they had 31 plays for 168 yards, and they scored 21 points. I think there's a lot to say about Michigan treating the 2024 version of their team like it is the 2023 version of their team. I think there's a lot to say about the kind of lack of depth that there is on this team in comparison to that one, because we've seen it now. Fresno State was able to do some things later in the game in that home opener. Arkansas State was able to close the game down to 10 points after all the backups came in. I didn't really count that when I talked about it over on my channel. I'm not really going to give too much credence to that here, because ultimately those were like third string guys. But you go back to last season and you see how much depth that team had, and they were still able to shut teams down later in games when those depth pieces came in. Now, it's also something that should be noted here. Michigan, of course, was without Will Johnson and Josiah Stewart. And you've been watching this team. Of course, Will Johnson is one of the best players in all of college football, let alone on this team. Josiah Stewart's the best edge player on this team, too. So you're down your 2 best defensive players. Jair Hill, by the way, had an incredible game. I'd be remorse if I didn't mention that here. But what happened late in third quarter? Well, Minnesota started going up-tempo, which took away Michigan's ability to sub in and out on a lot of plays. They caught Michigan several times, and on one of those drives, I even texted TJ about it, and I know he mentioned it on the Michigan show the other night. They caught Michigan at one point with nothing but second stringers along their defensive interior front. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant were sat on the sideline for like the last few plays of one of those drives. Again, if the offense doesn't substitute, the defense can't. So Minnesota played up tempo. They trapped Michigan in their base. They had to play more base because they have players with less experience out there. They're going fast. They can't get their defense completely set. And Minnesota gasses Michigan's defense. That's what happened. And now I feel like, especially talking in terms of like metagame stuff and game theory stuff, now it's interesting because it's almost like the blueprint to kind of maybe not beating, because I still think this Michigan defense is really, really good. Still up there in the top 10 of the SP Plus rankings, if you believe in that kind of thing. We're going to mention the SP Plus rankings a lot on these future Big Ten live streams, by the way, because I really believe in Bill Connolly's work. But now it's almost like the blueprint, in a way, has kind of been, well, it's kind of been laid out, hasn't it? To be able to kind of effectively move the ball on this Michigan defense. And in some ways, obviously, that came out a little bit in the Texas game, but here you're playing a lesser opponent and they're still able to drive on you a little bit. Of course, the Mason Graham hands to the face was a big call. If that isn't called, that I believe was on a 4th down. This game is entirely different, but also we have to talk about the onside kick to end the game, which was totally bailed Michigan out in this one. So Michigan survives 27-24. No, I don't think a quarterback change or going to a 2-quarterback system, or I know I've heard the rumors out there that Davis Warren is getting 40% of the practice snaps or this or that. I don't think that fixes it, because you've got an offensive line that isn't playing up to snuff, especially when it comes to pass protection, and you got wide receivers that frankly are just guys. Even Colston Loveland made, I think, kind of a mistake in not fighting for the ball more on that interception, but also that was a good decision, but a bad throw, by the way, that interception. I think that if you watch the film, the safety had been running on the dig route that was going under Colston Loveland, turned his hips, flipped his hips real quick, and came back the other way. When Orji released the ball, he was an open receiver, wide open, but he threw the ball short. He kind of hung it in the air. On top of that, gave the safety time to get over there, and that's it. And that, in case you haven't gotten the theme of the night between all the games we've talked about so far, this is a really deep competitive conference. You can't really overlook anybody, and you can't make terrible mistakes. You just can't, or else you end up in a game like Michigan against Minnesota towards the end there. And that's all I got on Michigan versus Minnesota. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff, by the way. Get your comments rolling. I would say get your super chats going in, but we made a little technical error in the background. And I don't know why I kind of started singing there. That was weird. We had a little technical error, and we are not live on a monetized platform. Previews. We got some game previews. We're going to preview some games. We're going to look at some games. We're going to analyze these teams. One of these teams we already talked about, and that is the Ohio State Buckeyes, because they really have a ramp up in schedule, by the way, don't they? Play Michigan State. Now you play Iowa. And I believe it's next week you play Oregon. I I may be wrong. I haven't double checked that. Don't fact check me on that. Don't do that. Not entirely welcome here. Or do. I don't care. There's not really much more. By the way, this game will be at 3:30 p.m. on CBS. The line on this game, by the way, is an incredible OSU minus 20.5. That is a crazy line to me. But Iowa isn't necessarily playing the best football they could be. We talked a minute ago about how Michigan is the new Iowa. Iowa, in some ways, isn't really themselves. We'll get into that in a minute. There's not really much more that can really be said about Ohio State at this point. First overall in SP Plus defense, like we mentioned a minute ago. Number 3 in run defense, by the way. They're giving up, get this, and I know they haven't really played much of anybody so far this season. MSU was, kind of a test. They had Lynch Adams and Nate Carter, who are decent running backs, pretty good running backs in my opinion, but not elite backs, and certainly not an elite offensive line. But Ohio State is giving up just 1.74 yards per rush so far this season. That's it. That's all you get with that Ohio State defensive front. We can go through the names. We go through all the players, but you know them by now. Tyleik Williams, JTT, Jack Sawyer, those linebackers, by the way, which is probably the youngest unit on that defense, the least experienced unit. Sonny Styles and those guys are playing incredibly well. The thing that stands out to me most about Ohio State's defense, and Ohio State in general, is that this is no longer a finesse team. And that may be hard, especially for some Michigan fans out there to hear. In previous years, especially offensively, is interesting. We were talking with JR the other night, who hosts obviously the Big Ten or the Ohio State channel, excuse me. We were talking to him. He had called into the Michigan Call-In show, and I mentioned how in previous years, if Ryan Day called a wide receiver screen or something of the like against Michigan, I would literally react to it in real time and be like, "Oh, thank you for the free down," because it was a little more finesse, and the wide receivers especially couldn't block out on the edge very well at all. So far this season, I see a team that is completely changed in those regards. Everybody on that offense blocks. And I think that's a sign of Chip Kelly's coaching. Obviously, Chip Kelly, the new offensive coordinator over there. And also the cornerbacks, by the way. I don't know what they've done defensively over there as far as coaching, but the cornerbacks, especially Igbenusson and Denzel Burke and those guys, are tackling in space much better than they had in previous years. Great defenses, sometimes it just comes down to having great tacklers. You don't get the extra yards, you don't get as many of the explosive plays, and therefore you fall behind against a team like Ohio State. And again, there's just not much more to say. Will Howard's playing incredibly effectively. He's right up there in the top 3 or 4, I believe, if I remember right, in quarterback pass efficiency rating. Now, again, haven't played anybody. The whole mantra, it's the same for Ohio State this season as it was for Michigan last season. But we grade on a curve here at Big Ten Live and at my other channel, Darren Talks Ball. If you play incredibly well against lesser competition and you blow them out, like Ohio State has done against all of this lesser competition they faced so far this year, you're going to get credit for it because you're doing exactly what you should be doing against lesser teams. Ohio State didn't play like Michigan down the stretch when they had a big lead on MSU. They kept the pedal to the metal and they closed out that game. That's what they've done in every game they played so far. So we're going to give them credit for that. Now, coming into this Iowa game, Iowa is 4th overall in run defense. They're giving up just 2.4 yards per carry. But the interesting thing in this game, and it goes back to Ohio State having not really played anybody themselves, is neither team has really seen a rushing attack like the other. Of course, Caleb Johnson is a tackle breaking machine, and so he'll test a lot of that, open space tackling that Ohio State has had so far this season. Iowa's probably the best offensive line Ohio State will have seen this season. Definitely the best defensive line. And by the way, the defensive line, Jay Higgins, all those guys over there for Iowa, Sebastian Castro. Again, we could name names from here until midnight if you want. Playing pretty well. But there's one weakness in this Iowa defense that I think is going to make the case, kind of allow Ohio State to break loose in this game. But it also brings me to an interesting question, because the one thing I've seen so far with Ohio State is the one thing they may have to do in this game against Iowa to really break this game open and cover that, again, 20.5 point spread. And then is it Iowa, which is usually a very, very good team against the pass. And people in my Discord, by the way, we have a Discord over at Darren Talks Ball. You can join if you want. People in my Discord have mentioned this because I got a lot of Iowa fans in there. There's a problem at cornerback too, and there's some problem in pass coverage. Iowa 54th outside of the top 50 so far this season in team pass efficiency defense. Quarterbacks on average have a rating of about 121.77 against this team. So that really begs the question, and I haven't seen this too much out of Will Howard and Chip Kelly with Will Howard so far this season. They've been able to just kind of ground and pound a lot with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. And at times they push the ball downfield. But again, even going back to that, what was it, the Akron game or the Marshall game, excuse me, a lot of those longer touchdowns were screens that just ended up going very long, or Emeka Ibuka breaking loose on a short route. So Iowa has one weakness, which is giving up more chunk pass plays than they have in the past. We saw that in the Iowa State game, by the way. We've seen that in a couple games so far this season. Will Ohio State push the ball a little bit more downfield? Because I think, unlike most years playing Iowa, you might be able to get away with it. You might just be able to get away with it. This is just a preview. I'm not going to do a prediction here. You'd have to go over to Darren Talks Ball to get all that quality content. Look at that sales pitch there. But I do think that it'll be a very, very tough test for Iowa. Iowa's offense, obviously, completely one-dimensional. Cade McNamara, interestingly enough, has a lower ESPN quarterback rating than Alex Orji right now. Cade McNamara super ineffective in certain games, played well at certain times, but those were against FCS schools and lesser competition. He'll be playing the best defense in the entire country this Saturday, again at 3:30 p.m. over on CBS. That's all I got for that one. Checking the comments here. Don't have too many more people commenting. Comment with your score predictions on the games. Let me know, by the way, this is our first episode, of course, of Big Ten Live. Let me know where you're watching from, what team you root for, and all that good stuff. If you have questions, we will answer them. We can chat a little bit here and there. And don't forget, of course, boom, to like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. We're going to get into Rutgers, Nebraska next, but I honestly need to take a drink and check in on this Detroit Lions football game. Interesting college football ties. Mike McDonald, of course, now the head coach at the Seattle Seahawks over there. But Detroit in their black and blue uniforms. Not sure how I feel about their black and blue uniforms, honestly. Little kitschy for me. Little kitschy. But they're playing well. I think Seattle's got a first and 10. There was a penalty. But anyway, you guys aren't here for NFL talk. That's not real football. I have opinions on new NFL pass interference rules and all that good stuff. We're going to preview Rutgers, Nebraska real quick, and then we're going to get into Michigan versus Washington coming up this weekend. And then, unless you guys have more questions or comments in the chat, we are going to roll on out of here. Rutgers versus Nebraska against the Cornhuskers, against the Corn Men. 4:00 p.m. over on FS1. Don't know who's on the call. Don't care. I don't really pay attention to who's on the call. But if people have opinions about announcers, just mute it if you don't like them. It's America. You can do what you want to an extent. 4 p.m. over at FS1. The line on this game is Nebraska -7, and I feel like, honestly, that's a pretty good line. The Vegas guys all know what they're doing, of course. The biggest question for me, and I think the biggest question for anybody in this one, of course, is can Nebraska contain Kyle Monangai? This is kind of a case of unstoppable force meets immovable object, to go down that corny. See what I did there? Cornhuskers. Corny analogy. Kyle Monangai so far this season, 32nd in yards per carry at 6.07, though. So he's only 32nd, but there's a lot of running backs around this country that are tearing up college football. By the way, I know they're not Big Ten, but Boise State, Ashton Jeanty, if you haven't heard of that guy or watched that guy yet, Boise State is averaging 8.5 something yards per carry. Ashton Jeanty should be in the Heisman conversation, but I don't know if you all are ready for that yet. Are you all ready for that conversation yet? I'm not sure. But again, unstoppable force, immovable object. Nebraska, 15th in run defense, giving up just 2.75 yards per carry given up, and they were 8th. At last check, they were 8th in SP plus defense. I've been saying it so far this season. They've got some good defensive backs over there. I'm blanking on names right now. Yes, Frank Corone, prayers to the hurricane victims. I should have opened with that. I know Uncle Lou, one of the bigger college football YouTubers out there, was having some issues, had some unfortunate things going on. And yes, RIP to Pete Rose. Pete Rose, unfortunately, passed away earlier today. And I'm just going to add one more in there. Chris Christopherson, RIP, big man. Love the rubber ducky. If you're not familiar with the movie Convoy, did you even grow up in the 80s or 90s? Anyway, I have to remember where I was at here. Nebraska's defense, 8th in SP plus last time I checked. Been saying it all year. They are an underrated defensive unit. Now, of course, they haven't played the best quality of competition so far this season, highest quality competition in some regards, but this team played Colorado, who just laid it on some lesser competition themselves, and they played Illinois, who, as we saw in that Penn State game, incapable of scoring points against better defenses, but looked like a pretty tough team in that Penn State game. So Nebraska's defense, I think, is in some ways legit. Do I think that they're elite of elite? Do I think that they're up there with the team that we just talked about in the Ohio State Buckeyes? Absolutely not. But their run defense is pretty good so far this season. Rutgers has to be multifaceted. against this Nebraska defense. If they try to hand the ball off to Kyle Monangai 30, 35 times and give him like a Blake Corum level of carrying capacity in this game, I don't think they're going to be able to pull it off. Again, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, not the world's best thrower of the football. So I don't know if Rutgers will be able to pull this game off without Ethan Kaliak-Manis being able to make some throws downfield. Now, they do have a really great receiver over there, pretty good receiver. They got that like 6'6" guy whose name I'm blanking on at the moment. I'm not great with names, by the way. I have to admit, as a new host of the show, you're going to hear me blank on names all the time. I apologize. It happens. I'll do my best to describe it. If you're a fan of the team, you probably know what I'm talking about anyway, because there's probably only one receiver on Rutgers that's 6'6". So there you go. Rutgers, I think, has to be really multifaceted in this game. And the interesting thing to me is Rutgers, speaking of run defense, speaking of Big Ten football, running the football, converting third downs. Football isn't all that complicated of a sport, by the way, people. It is, but it isn't. We'll talk about that sometime if you're ready for that. Rutgers themselves are 98th in the country, and especially playing kind of like the competition they face, Virginia Tech and some other lower level competition. 98th in the country is pretty bad. They're giving up 5.91 yards per rush. So my question really for Nebraska in this game, and I think it was really interesting to me, by the way, going back to that Nebraska-Illinois game, I really thought Nebraska was going to start out running the football in that game. First year starting quarterback, decent to good, pretty good offensive line. You know, they got some ability to run the football, of course, with Ramir Johnson and Dante Dowdell. I thought they'd open up that game and run the football, establish the run, get the play action going for their first year quarterback. And they came out and they just slang the ball all over the yard. Slung the ball all over the yard. And they really put that game in Dylan Raiola's hands. And now we saw down the line, Dylan Raiola made some mistakes in that game. I believe he threw an interception. In fact, I know he threw an interception now that I think about it. And Illinois was able to win that game. If Nebraska, against this Rutgers defense, which, by the way, has some pretty good corners, they have a defensive end who can get pressure in Aaron Lewis. They have some pretty good linebackers. If Nebraska does the same thing in this game and just puts the ball in Dylan Raiola's hands too often and puts the game on his shoulders, I think you may have another situation in this one where Rutgers is able to keep it close and able to maybe pull one out late. Because as we all know, what does Nebraska do? Nebraska. It's a verb on my channel. And on my channel over on Darren Talks Ball, Nebraska-ing is a verb. It's what they do. They lose close games. Something like 3-28 or something like that in close games over the past few seasons in one touchdown games. They've really got to let Dante Dowdell and Ramir Johnson cook. I literally have it in my notes right here. Cook, underlined. They have to. 98th run defense in the country. Do you hear me? What's his name? Matt Rule. Do you hear me? Do you hear what I'm saying right now? Run the ball, establish the run for your quarterback, protect your quarterback, and I have that underlined here to protect Raiola. I do think Nebraska wins this game, but again, Rutgers is a tough team, and as we've seen, this conference is deeper and more competitive than a lot of people give it credit for. Seven teams, by the way. I don't know if you see my hands there. 7 teams in the AP poll this week. We're going to get to more questions and comments here right quick. Frank Carone, yes. Chris Rubber Duck 10-4 Rubber Ducky. Yeah, Chris Christopherson was a big part of my childhood, not gonna lie. He and as you guys can probably see the guitar in the background, I'm a bit of a music snob. He and Johnny Cash, obviously, and John Prine and Willie Nelson and the Highwaymen. I grew up listening to the Highwaymen on an old tape deck in my dad's old GMC work truck, driving home with him. My dad working at GM, though, back in those years. Anyway, speaking of Michigan, speaking of working at GM and things like that, we're going to finish out, not Minnesota, Michigan, Washington and Michigan. We're going to preview the Michigan-Washington game right here. And then I'm going to get going because I'm trying my damnedest to not get distracted by this Lions-Seahawks game, and I'm doing it for you guys. Like, share, and subscribe. Lions are now up 14-0, by the way. little score update. 91 people watching. Appreciate all you guys. My very first time hosting Big Ten Live. We had a little bit of a mistake. We had a little bit of a glitch and an error. I still appreciate you guys watching. We are on Mark Rogers' channel, but not the Voice of College Football channel. So maybe people were jumping in here expecting like Elvis talk. I know Mark Rogers is a big Elvis guy, speaking of music. But anyway, that was a big tangent. My apologies to Chris for trying to cut this. We'll get on topic. Michigan versus Washington. Fun fact, Washington is only giving up 3.74 yards per carry, and they've only given up 4 rushing touchdowns all year. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier in this live stream, by the way. Michigan has, out of all the teams in this conference, outside of like the Northwesterns and Purdue's of the world of this conference, they have an extremely narrow path to victory. They really do. In my nerd life, I play a lot of card games and things. We have a term called win condition. It's, if you're not familiar, the conditions in the game which present you with your best opportunity to win. So Michigan, thinking in that way, their win con, if you will, what we'd say for short, is a game in which they're able to run the football, control time of possession, hold the other team's offense off of the field as much as possible, and play great special teams. More so than any other team in college football, I think. Any other, AP poll, better, higher quality in terms of talent and things teams, comparing them to other high-level teams. Absolutely needs all 3 phases of the game playing well. We saw that late in the Minnesota game with the punt return that they gave up where they didn't have the guy covered, obviously. We've seen that with turnovers. You can't turn the ball over either. You have to possess the football, take care of the football, play great defense. The checklist for Michigan to win the game is long, is what I'm saying. There's no, we're in a shootout. Well, we have a great quarterback we can lean on. We're in a defensive struggle. We can really, really just leave it up to this defense alone. Because to be frank with you guys and be frank with whatever Michigan fans may be watching out there, you don't have the depth on defense to do that for 4 full quarters. Washington rushing, only giving up 3.74 yards per carry so far this year kind of scares me. But then I know they haven't faced, outside of Rutgers, they haven't faced a team that runs the ball a lot. And by the way, Kyle Monangai absolutely gashed them. So from what I gleaned from the Rutgers-Washington game that I did get to watch last weekend, by the way, I did watch some football despite it being my niece's birthday. Happy birthday to my niece, Lucy, by the way. She's turning 2. She did turn 2. She turns 2 today, actually. I didn't think about it. Anyway. The big issue for Washington was the tackling. And maybe that presents itself here, but that's an if and maybe will happen thing that I can't really guarantee to you guys. Maybe that gets better. Of course, Steven Belichick, there's the name, is their defensive coordinator, which is really funny to me, really weird to me. That's an odd, random fact, fun fact for Washington. People that aren't familiar with Washington out there. Washington's also 31%. They're at 31% in third down defense, 29th in college football. So when you're talking about Michigan's offense, they have to convert on third downs. They have to run the ball effectively. And the stats say that Washington may actually keep this game close. By the way, this is kind of a Giles Jackson revenge game, quote unquote. There's an interesting player that's kind of taken off in some ways and become not necessarily a star, but has gotten some touches and some good receptions for Washington so far this year. And last year, he was also on the team in Giles Jackson. 7 receptions for 59 yards last week. And again, they did give up 184 rushing yards to Rutgers at 5.3 yards per carry to Monangai. This game is really going to come down to whether Michigan can run the football or not. I hate to put it as simply as that, but that's all this offense can really do or show me at this point. Alex Orji had some effective throws last week. I thought he manipulated the pocket really well under pressure. And by the way, Washington could put Michigan under pressure in terms of the quarterback, in terms of Alex Orji in this game. I don't know what Carson Bruner's availability is. I think he got a little bit banged up in that Rutgers game, but he's a really great linebacker. Look for him to be blitzing a little bit here and there and try to put that Michigan offensive line on their heels. By the way, this game is at 7:30 p.m. on NBC. The line is 2.5 in Washington's favor. Speaking of the passing game for Michigan, I still don't think it's going to get much better in this game either. Speaking of Alex Orji, They just played Minnesota, who was like second or third in the country, or was at the time second or third in the country in team pass efficiency defense, and had intercepted the ball right up there with the Illinois of the world. They had like 7 interceptions going into that game. Now they have 8. Washington is third in team pass efficiency defense. So I wouldn't expect a big game out of Alex Orji unless it's on the ground. Again, I think they'll have to once again do what they did in that USC game in the first half and in the Minnesota game in the first half, which is tilt the field. They got to play field position. They got to play Iowa football. That's how Michigan wins. By the way, Michigan so far this season, speaking of pass efficiency defense, is only 55th. 55th in team pass efficiency defense. And this is another thing that scares me as a Michigan fan coming into this one. Will Rogers is one of the best and most experienced quarterbacks that they will see this season outside of Quinn Ewers. Low-key, pretty good quarterback play over there for Washington. So, again, I'm not doing predictions here. You guys can follow me over at Darren Talks Ball for all of that. But just a little preview of Michigan and Washington, which I think the Vegas betting people have quite right. This could be a very close game. And Washington has more ways to win. They just do. I see more paths to victory for Washington. Their offense has some pretty good wide receivers. They have a good quarterback. By the way, they have a good running back we didn't really get into. Decent running back. Can that offensive line stand up to Michigan's defensive line is a question. That'll also be a big question in this game. Now that I think about it, I didn't have that down in my notes, so I apologize for that. Michigan's defensive line can dominate. If their offensive line can dominate, they will win the game. But even then, it'll be close because, again, the offense just hasn't shown me much so far this year. That's going to do it for my Michigan-Washington preview. That's also going to do it for this live stream. And I got to find my little thing. Here we go. There's my little thing back up on there. Don't forget, by the way, to like the video, share around, and I would say subscribe, but we're on Mark's other channel. So maybe subscribe? I don't know. Anyways, have fun, guys. Until next time, by the way, I will be on next Monday at 8 p.m. on the actual college football channel if we know what we're doing here. And I think we do. I think I know what I'm doing. Anyways, until next time, as always, be kind to other people out there, everybody, and I'll see you again next Monday at 8 p.m.